introduce. Oh, okay, so we're starting to record this now. Thank you, Penny. I guess I guess I should have thought to press the button. Anyway, the important thing to understand is the following. Board members get their agenda and they see right away on the agenda proposal to increase dues. And the nature of us as humans was characterized in a book by Malcolm Gladwell about 10 years ago called Blink. Boom, in the blink of an eye, we've already made a decision on that proposal. If I can give you any comment about my 30 years of serving on board experience, seek first to understand before wanting to be understood. Let me explain why. If you haven't asked any questions, if you haven't had the benefit of your fellow board members asking their questions at a board meeting, how will you know your position on the question is actually correct? And the problem is when you declare yourself, I'm against this, too early, you've just painted yourself in a corner. Because a good chair is going to allow the person who's proposing the actions to present it, to ask for questions about the proposal, and you might find out you're wrong. And then if you've already declared yourself on the issue, you're going to have to figure out how to get out of that corner that you just painted yourself into by saying, I'm against it. If you say that at the top end of a meeting, I'm against it, how when you finally hear the questions? Interesting, when we were presenting the shocks, you got to understand, I've been a Rotary member for 35 years. That's, it's a fair amount of time. Oh, by the way, some of you who go back equally will remember that means a time before women. One of the interesting things that I have to rail about in corporate boards is gender balance, equity, diversity, inclusion. These are good concepts for boards. Why are they good for boards? Here's a really important question. What type of board makes better decisions in the long run? One comprising nothing but men, or one that is in fact gender balanced? If you think about it for a brief minute or two, you realize that a more diverse board creates better decisions. Why? Because we're asking more and different questions about our proposal from different points of view. And so I can't get enough of diversity and inclusion because I can't put myself in everybody else's shoes. So it gets back to how our board is considering proposals. You shouldn't declare yourself on issues too early. You should ask questions about the proposals so that we understand what's there or not. Now, the board accepts or rejects the proposal. If the board is prepared to reject a decision, whoever's made the proposal needs to have clear reasons why. Those reasons, by the way, don't include my gut tells me, my spidey senses tingling or something along those lines. No, you have to have very rational decisions. I have a strange part-time job. For the last almost 30 years, I serve as a deputy judge in the Ontario Small Claims Court systems. I adjudicate claims up to $35,000. Yesterday, I heard a trial. The trial was located in the Simcoe Small Claims Court. Two parties, both of whom think they're absolutely correct in their position. I have to tell the loser why his business now has to pay $2,500 to the winner. I can't say it's because my gut tells me you stole this money. I can't do that. Why not? Because that isn't what people expect from judges. They expect me to review the evidence they presented. Like only Judge Judy can get away with that BS, but me, I have to explain myself. I have to say A, B, C, you explained this, and this is why that argument doesn't work. It's the same thing when you vote against a proposal that one of your colleagues who's an officer of your club has made, and you're not prepared to go ahead with it, then collectively, your board has to be able to say, this is why we're not doing it. Because if it's a risk that wasn't accounted for, if it's because the proposal isn't congruent with the mission, vision, and values of the club, the person who made the proposal can take it away, rework it, and potentially come back next month and make the proposal again in a revised form. Now, in a minute or two, we're going to discuss a really important issue. And that is, maybe in our clubs at the board, instead of yay or nay, accept or reject, we should start adopting a consensus building approach. But first I want to talk, anybody know who this guy is? Anybody can take yourself off of mute if you have any clue who this guy is. Yeah, he's an army man. He is dressed up as a brigadier general. By the way, there was the uniform is kind of old. You're right. It's sort of Spanish-American War, early 20th century. This guy wrote a book, and there's his book. The book, there's the book, Robert's Rules of Order. By the way, there are many editions of the book. Do you know why there are many editions of the book? Because different parts of the family started fighting with each other, and so they split the copyright, and they make a fortune now, still selling versions of the revised. At the time that he wrote the book, this is Major Henry Robert. The Robert in Robert's Rules of Order. How did he get to be a general? They had a bizarre system in the US Army at the time that they would make you a general for the last day of your career before resignation, so you could take pictures that your grandma would be happy to hang on her wall, and you'd get the pension of a brigadier general. But even though he spent most of his life as a major, he spent his life as a major in the Army Corps of Engineers. What does being a major in the Army Corps of Engineers means? It means you build bridges. There's one difference between someone who works for the Army Corps of Engineers and someone who's a civil engineer in regular public practice. The big difference is when you're trying to build a bridge in the Army Corps of Engineers, someone's usually trying to shoot at you or drop a bomb at you. And why does that make it important? Because you got to make decisions fast. And what Robert was concerned about is making decisions as quickly as possible. And so we've got these books, one of which, the original, is really thick. That's about 1.5 inches. And oh my goodness, call the question, procedure, but it's absolutely all procedure rather than substance. Think about his history. He has lots of decisions to make, most of which are what I would call low value decisions. And therefore, it was important to come up with procedures where you could drive those decisions through quickly. He absolutely encapsulated the rule, majority, 50% plus one rules. Here's the trouble with 50% plus one. If in fact, I voted against your proposal, but then it gained traction with the majority of board members, I am now your enemy. Oh, I'm not really your enemy because, of course, we all believe in the four-way test, goodwill and better friendships. We believe in fellowship. We come to meetings regularly. But we've all seen this happen at a Rotary Club. You know, Marcel's really upset that we voted against his proposal. And although he accepts it. So one of my concerns about the whole Roberts approach is to be an expert in parliamentary procedure is really not what our Rotary clubs need. We need people who know how to build consensuses. So what's a consensus? Like I said, I don't like winners and losers because losers have long memories. But a consensus is a final decision that allows all of us to see our part of the contribution in the final decision. Maybe Marcel's proposal had some ideas there that were pretty good. The trouble is if we just vote yay or nay and we reject the proposal and we say, Marcel, it's because of A, B, and C. So Marcel said we ought to put the dues up this year. And we ought to put the dues up because I can see these expenses coming and I can see these revenues declining. And at the end of the day, we should put them up. At the board meeting, if we just narrow our focus on the decision at hand, we lose the benefit of making that decision in one where everybody could support it. This is where the chair of the meeting, and you'll notice I'm not saying the president because I'm going to talk to that in the next slide. But this is where the chair of the meeting really earns the big bucks that all of us get in Rotary. You're right. We don't have, we spend our time freely trying to make things better in the future. But the important thing is that the chair has to spot when there's going to be potentially a divisive agreement, one where people are maybe starting to back themselves into corners. The chair is starting to keep track of interests and positions. Everyone has to come at this with a willingness to understand each other before they seek to be understood. A key phrase that chair is going to use in forging consensus is, could you live with this if? Could you live with this if? I'm not sure how much of this consensus building actually goes on in boards. Sometimes I hear boards that are divided on issues. Over the course of my 35 years of being a Rotarian, I've actually been called in by other clubs from time to time because we got a big problem. We made some decisions that a minority of the board, of the members, don't agree with. Well, how did that happen? The answer is because we paid too much attention to Robert's Rules of Order and not enough attention to making sure for our big strategic decisions that everyone could live with this if. Had we in fact made an agreement that everybody could support. So this begs the question, who's running the board meetings? Back to my chart where the individual officers report to the board. So our standard constitution, which you are entitled to change, has what I call an institutional or an inherent conflict of interest. The president reports to the board. The president is the chair of the board. By the way, not unlike what used to pertain in the banking system 25 years ago. 25 years ago, it was very common in big banks throughout the world for the CEO to also be the chair of the board. To this day, that continues to be the case in big American banks. By the way, big Canadian banks, about 15, 20 years ago, started scratching their heads, asked themselves this question. If the CEO reports to the board, how could the CEO run the board meetings, realize that there was an institutional conflict of interest and said, no, we have to split that up. And in fact, they went even farther in Canadian banks and said the whole board should be independent of management. Like, why have a board if we're just going to have half of senior management serve on that board, and they totally split it separate and apart. Curiously, for the last 20 years, I got bad news for my American cousins. American banks have dollar for dollar been outperforming American banks since then. It's probably not just because of their governance system, but boy, that's something there. Shouldn't our wee little Rotary clubs, which have nothing to do with the kind of money they're running, take some notes of this? Now, there's a solution that's available to us. As I said, it's you know, the club constitution can be revised by a club. Should we not have someone other than the president chairing board meetings and being responsible, not for the direction of the club? That's clearly the responsibility of the president together with the collective board. But should we have a separate chair of the board, potentially to run the process of the board? That person would be responsible for the board agenda and making sure that each officer of the board reported to the board rather than reported as sort of part of the board. And that's where we get really wishy-washy. Clearly, the president is responsible for the business of the club. Who could be this person? Gee, you know, a past president, a former distinguished member. You know, it's something that I'm planting seeds here, you know, to let you think about it, because some key, you know, each club, I'm not telling you this is how you should do it, but I'm planting the seed to ask yourselves the question, gee, if we want full bang for our buck when it comes to having the board supervise the president, the treasurer, the secretary, all of the other directors, shouldn't the leadership of the board be somewhat different? Now, what do we expect our board to do? Well, that first major job is they're there to supervise the performance of the officers. Oh, and provide for their succession as well. This is a real problem for a lot of clubs. We get to the annual cycle and we said, oh, who's going to be president this year? And they look around, they say, any volunteers? And everybody, of course, looks down at their nose because everybody knows what a big job it is to be president. And, you know, it gets worse. Oh, you know, treasurer, oh gosh, I got a lot of work. Secretary, that's even worse. Director, you know, but, you know, one of the realities we have in our clubs is board. You should have a 2 or 3 year vision of what the board itself is going to look like in terms of succession planning. This is what you're there for collectively. You should clearly have an annual plan and engage with each of the individual officers in creating that annual plan and all of the major decisions that'll come out of that plan. And by the way, once we've made a plan, what are we doing to monitor our performance? Oh, and here come the attorneys to give us this slide. You have legal obligations. Here are the legal principles that are applicable to you as a board member. And oh, by the way, RI says, and by the way, we want to give you these other RI principles. They're not so onerous. But let's look at the big 3 legal duties for a board member. And I'm going to talk about the first one, fiduciary duty, at length on the next slide. But you have a duty of care and a duty of obedience. That's a weird one. What does it mean? Who am I obedient to? You are obedient to your fellow board members. And the most important ramification of your being obedient to your fellow board members is a board of a club only speaks with one voice. Whose voice? Whomever the board has authorized to speak on its behalf, usually the chair of the board, or sometimes the CEO/president. RI gives us some really easy duties. You know, you have to attend. But wait a minute. Our attendance numbers have been going into, they're starting to look like the stock market right now. And, anybody who follows the stock market knows exactly what I'm saying after the last week. Our attendance isn't good. And part of the problem is RI says we should have at least 60%. Never heard of a club actually enforcing that rule. I've never seen anybody except after years of not showing up. And it usually comes on the annual renewal where the club member finally realizes, hey, I haven't attended since, 2014. Maybe I shouldn't be renewing anymore. And that's where we finally recognize their departure from the club. But RI tells us about attendance. They also tell us that we should work within our districts and our zones. And that's why we're here as part of the district conference. Let's talk about the big one, the fiduciary duty. We are to, as directors, act honestly and in good faith. I never have a problem with Rotarians in this regard. Oh, by the way, though, RI certainly has some interesting challenges with this. Let's talk about big bucks international projects. We don't fund anything without another Rotary Club on the ground out there in international land. Why is that? Well, we understand that not everybody in the world acts honestly and in good faith. A fiduciary duty for a corporate director is to act in the best interests of the overall organization, not just some specific constituency. What does that mean? Not in the interest of a specific constituency. We're really fortunate in Rotary that we're pretty much the same sort of people, professionals, things, different demographic trends like that. It's also our biggest weakness right now. We all keep saying, how do we get young people into our club? I look around the board table and I say, okay, who's the youngest person here? And sometimes the age is in excess of 45. Well, how do we get young people in here? Okay, so then we get a young person and then we say to that person, well, you're going to speak for young people. No, they're not. They have to make decisions in the best interests of the overall organization. Here's a real subtle one that we frequently have problems. A board member should not act when there is a conflict of interest. When do they have a conflict of interest? Well, as I said, one of the first problems we have is the institutional conflict of interest is how can the board supervise the president when the president is chairing the board? It's subtle. Yeah, I know maybe I'm getting too hinky just because I'm an attorney or something about these issues, but it's a concern. But then, like, Rotary's doing good in small communities in a lot of cases. Even in our district, which is a very populous district, and what's a conflict of interest? I'm not going to go into any specifics, but the reality is I've seen them. I certainly understand, that we've had them in the past, and sometimes people need a little assistance in this regard as to not acting when there's a conflict of interest. Similarly, information at a board meeting is subject to the decisions that the board makes on what will be disclosed to the general membership, confidential. One of the important issues that we have to deal with sometimes was best epitomized about 20, 30 years ago in the proliferation of four-way test committees. A four-way test committee was kind of, well, we're going to get a couple of the wise minds that we've got around our club, and now we have to make some hard decisions about why we want to kick Marcel out of the club because, business ethically, he's really not a good person. And so how do we politely deal with that issue? That's highly confidential in the context of a Rotary board. Board members have to be able to freely discuss it without expecting that information to leak out beyond. And that's an important part of fiduciary duty as well. And not taking advantage of one's position on the board makes more sense in a corporate board, I'll be the first to admit. But sometimes, again, smaller communities, we may have challenges. Young people love going on a Rotary board. They do, because it's good experience. And sometimes I say to young people, okay, now go have a chat with your spouse about how you've just put your house on the line. What do you mean I just put my house on the line? Well, you've got legal liabilities that have dollars and cents potential for affecting your life. Well, wait a minute, I thought we had an insurance policy. Yes, we do. We have a very good insurance policy. You should read it. It's about 80 pages long. And yeah, right away, people back off. Let me tell you what our insurance policy excludes. Gross negligence. Well, what's gross negligence? It's acting in the face of information that was very clear. Maybe willful blindness is part of gross negligence. Oh, if you have bad information and you've chosen not to act on that information, it won't cover that. If you know about specific hazards, it won't cover that. I once served on a large club board. The information that was given to me is an individual, and this was 25, 30 years ago, a long time ago, before we had a better understanding of these issues. Someone who was running a youth program had just been indicted, charged with sexual offenses involving a minor. And our club wasn't prepared to act to suspend that person, who was not a member, from their function in the youth programs. This is where I think I learned the WTF acronym, because I looked at my fellow board members and said, we're not protected here. In the face of this type of information, we have to act. And that's one of the things that we sometimes forget about. And we're trying to do good. We do good. It's great that we do good. So how do we protect ourselves? The best board behavior is to ask questions. Ask lots of questions. And yet we go to board meetings and we ask almost no questions. Well, it's because, Marcel, it's so understandable. Yeah, but every proposal, somebody should be asking something about these proposals, even if it is to confirm what you already know. Why? My formal answer is to obtain reasonable assurance that the proposal is consistent with our mission, vision, and values and plans, and that there is no unacceptable risk. Phew, we all dodged a bullet in the spring of 2020 with respect to big events. I haven't heard anybody had made a big booking which had a lot of risk for in-person events after the pandemic started, where they had made those plans and commitments beforehand. Who here had contingency plans of what to do in a global pandemic in their club? Anybody? Nobody did. None of us did. Oh, wow, you gotta be darn sure for the next 20 years, we're gonna ask that for all of the organizations we're on as a question. What are our plans in case of another pandemic? And management sure as heck better have those answers for us. Let's shift now and just talk about effective communications. Here's the problem with effective communications. It involves 4 things in our clubs. The first one is, to be effective, a message must be sent. That's why I keep my coffee mug here, which says you're on mute, Because if I'm talking, or if you're talking and or we see them, I'm on mute, and of course, the message can't be sent. The message must be received. It's no good my audio getting out if you can't hear me. And that's why, in fact, some of our colleagues like preferably to wear the earphones. I'll pick on Rod for a second. Thank you for being kind enough to want to listen to me, to wear, to have me right in your head with earphones. And so the message must be received. The message must be understood. Here's a simple little test about messages being understood. Peter and Paul are brothers. Peter is 18, Paul is 2. How many more years older is Peter than Paul? It's a simple question. Take yourself off of mute, give me the answer. 2 brothers, Peter and Paul. Peter is 18, Paul is 2. How much older is Peter than Paul? Go ahead,
16
Greg.
years.
Wrong.
Same age.
Same age. Correct, Joan. Because when I said Paul is 2, I spelt 2, T-O-O. And that is why in some critical messaging systems, we have that read back. That's why we frequently talk to people and we say, do you see? Why do we say, do you see? When we should be asking, did you hear? Well, I heard it, but I want to make sure that in my mind's eye, I have the same image that you're trying to send, that I've received that. And then the most important aspect of any message is it must be remembered. One of the reasons why I'm happy to give you copies of my slides is hopefully you may remember parts of my message. By the way, it's really frustrating being a professional trainer. I know 80% of whatever I've taught today will be forgotten by Monday. 80%. Wow. If I had that kind of success rate as a doctor, I'd pack it in right away. But trainers are regularly dealing with that 80% depreciation of information. That's why we try to remember what we did. Now, what does that mean for a club? How does a club remember what was decided and what was in fact tracked? We take minutes. We take minutes, we highlight hopefully action items in minutes. Penny Hutton, and I'm sorry to embarrass you, Penny, but Penny Hutton is a great asset to our district because she does this. She is taking minutes of district meetings and she's highlighting action items that have to be done. And we take those actions based on that because a secretary of an organization is the memory of the organization. And going back to the effective communications, the big problem with board meetings at Rotary clubs is, nobody's really taking minutes because everybody hates the secretary's role because it's hard work. Yes, it is hard. But that's also why the board should be working on its succession to make sure after a couple, hopefully we can have a secretary for 2, 3, 4 years. But, after 3 or 4 years, we're really imposing upon somebody because it's hard work. And we have to be able to move on with somebody else. So here's what governance is. It's how we keep our clubs on track, which in turn allows us to stay relevant, and how we change our clubs. Governance is really, really important for our clubs. And yet, sometimes it comes down to that institutional memory. It has inherent problems, as I said, with maybe the president shouldn't be the person who runs the board. Anyways, I'm happy right now. We've got what, Penny, about 5-10 minutes at least? You know, I think we're okay. Yeah, lips are moving, but nothing's coming out right now, Penny. But
Never remember the unmute. We have about almost 15 minutes.
we got lots of time for questions. I'd be happy as well to hear from you. Marcel, I think this is a pile of malarkey. I'd be happy to argue that with you. But Rob, I see you've got your hand up, so let me start with you.
Yeah, hi Marcel, and thanks for going through this presentation. I happen to, as part of my life, I'm an elected councillor in the region of Niagara, and so I'm listening to some of the things, and I completely agree with you. But I think it's a very difficult proposition for small clubs in particular to try and get that added layer of governance, if you want, like having that person that's going to be the guiding light, I guess, at the board level or whatever the case may be for meetings. It becomes quite difficult. So so that's part and parcel with that. Our club went through a pretty significant problem a few years ago, and we ended up putting in place some additional things on top of the guiding charters and stuff, code of conduct, a code of ethics. We put a conflict resolution process in place, and you know, all of these things were very, very well thought out, even in discussions with people at the district. So, what are your thoughts on that? Like, you know, sort of making sure that it's very, very clear what these things should be and how they should be followed.
So you are, because of your municipal councillorship, and I'm I used to be part of the Municipal Integrity Commission process and may have had occasion to deal with complaints from the region of Niagara, but I couldn't actually say or not because it's a confidential process.
Yeah.
You have, as a municipal councillor, the highest conflict of interest standard that I regularly refer to in my work, and that's given to us by the Municipal Conflict of Interest Act in the province of Ontario. For the purposes of everybody, let me give you Marcel's handy dandy 30-second outline of the Municipal Conflict of Interest Act. It makes it clear that a municipal councillor has conflicts when they, immediate family members, and even people in a sort of immediate sphere might benefit directly or indirectly. And benefit is defined extremely widely, not just monetarily. One of the biggest challenges in practice in all of the municipalities in the province of Ontario is we have incredible differences in size that this act has to apply to. We have the tiny little township of Shunia outside of Thunder Bay, Ontario, which has about a couple hundred residents in a very rural setting, which not a lot happens there, to the municipality, or you know, the city of Toronto, which is of course huge, millions of people. The rule is really simple. If you have a conflict, you are expected to declare that conflict and get the heck out of the room and have nothing to do and no contact with any of your colleagues on the board, council, whatever it is that you're serving on. So like I say, that's a really high standard. It's a really draconian resolution. Now, the problem, Rob, and I've already alluded to, our Rotary clubs serve in small communities in many cases. It's not obvious to many people what is a conflict of interest, what isn't a conflict of interest. The problem as well is conflicts of interest are sometimes objective versus subjective. And the problem with that is you may think you don't have a problem, and you may think that you can control or limit the problems, but it doesn't matter what you think. It matters what some external person thinks. And that's why, Rob, I think the ideas of having very clear conflict of interest rules, having systems to be able to manage that for your club make a lot of sense. Again, I can see why Rotary International doesn't necessarily want to go there, to prescribe this, but I think you're absolutely right to have done this for your club, particularly if you've had challenges, which is a polite way of saying problems. If you've had problems, yeah, absolutely. Try and figure them out, try and set up a system to make it work. The problem becomes when clubs and organizations think, oh, don't worry, we'll be able to figure it out. The biggest thing of if we'll be able to figure it out actually worked, then none of us would need wills. Why do we have wills? We don't care what's in our will. It'll happen after we're gone. We're not going to see it happen. We may believe in some afterlife and being able to look down on what's going on. But the reality is, yeah, but if you don't have a will, there's going to be absolute chaos among your heirs and family and whomever else. A will, in fact, helps stop that. And we're telling you, you're planning correctly. It's the same thing in a club. To plan for problems is a really good idea. Does that respond, Rob, to your questions?
Yeah, I happen to be in agreement with you, and it's the planning for problems that's the important part, and having everybody know and understand, what you can and can't do in certain situations. I mean, you're quite right. Rotary clubs, we tend to have those that are very involved with the community as well. I mean, my goodness, I look at what my wife and I are doing in the Beamsville community here. But the thing is that when you're a director of another organization, if there's something that's going on, that there's a direct financial conflict that's going into play, boy, you'd be foolish not to declare as it's going on and step aside, because boy, you let those horses out of the barn, even with a Rotary Club, and boy, as you talked about, you're going to have people that are going to be upset, and that festers, and that really ruins clubs as it goes on. So that's why we went there. So
okay, Ross, you had your hand up there for a minute.
Yeah, I did. Thanks, Marcel. Do you recommend that clubs incorporate? The district recently has done that, and there should be a higher level of protection for individuals if a club is incorporated, but do you recommend that?
I think that if your board is not insurable, they're not insurable whether or not you've incorporated or not. Incorporation, see, I always, I don't rely a lot in this sector, the not-for-profit sector. And let's understand, lots of us get confused about if we're charitable or not-for-profit. A club is inherently a not-for-profit organization on the Canadian side. I'm not going to speak to the American side, even though I happen to be a member of the New York Bar. I don't practice in the area and don't give advice there accordingly. But on this side of the river, we are not-for-profits, which gives us a certain advantage under the tax codes, but we are not necessarily charities, so we don't issue receipts. Incorporation is expensive. Oh, I can find somebody from Cobb Jones to do it for free, and that happens to be where the problems begin. Free legal work is worth every penny you're paying for it. The reality is that when you don't pay for it, you don't have an expectation, a certain expectation of service and advice. As a result, it's expensive. And one of the things that clubs forget who do incorporate is it has an absolute rigorous annual requirement of filing various documents. And in our Rotary system, where we change the deck chairs every year, or every 2 years, or every 3 years, where does mail go to consistently in this electronic age? If we have a generic email address for secretary at Norfolk Sunrise Rotary.ca or something like that, then yeah, maybe it kind of makes sense and everything comes into that box. But pretty soon the spammers find that email box, and the person who is delegated to go there says, well, there's nothing there, so I'm going to stop going into the generic email box. Incorporation ain't all that it's cracked up to be. What you need, instead of incorporation, go look at the insurance policy and read how well this covers off your situations or not. Are you in fact doing something that potentially wouldn't be covered by insurance on the acting in the face of hazardous conditions? Are you grossly negligent by not asking appropriate questions and the like, Ross? Does that answer you?
Yep, thank you.
Okay, any other questions or comments? I'm happy for both. And yeah, go ahead, Jim. Yeah, you got to unmute.
This is a great presentation, Marcel. This is the second time I've enjoyed this, and it's guided me a little bit. I should tip my hat and say I'm a retired military engineer, so that perhaps puts me in a certain corner. But I fret a little bit when I participate in the boards that I participate in. And I kind of wonder if it isn't a little institutional. Rotary are people of action. They're not people of process. And so I'm not sure that we're ever going to get to kind of the legal model that you're instructing us about. But you probably thought about it more than us. How would you propose we get from A to B? Just as a comment to that, should everybody that is a Rotary board member be required to listen to you at least? Should we at least be required to open your instruction pack to consider what our obligations as board members are? Because I'm not seeing that that's happening. Anyways, just how do we get from A to B is my question.
As I said, I teach in a bigger program in the Caribbean and have taught here in Canada many times on this subject. We call this the drinking the Kool-Aid point. After I've given my first 2 modules, after the first day of 6 hours of courses, we will see on participants' faces, they've hit their epiphany. This makes sense. I got to go back and do this. The trouble is they're always confronted exactly with that question, Jim, where do I start? And the problem that we have on all of our boards is time. Can you get your board? So I have a headache right now. In fact, I'm going to be getting a call probably in half an hour about a board that I'm the chair of the board of. And it's a big headache because I think our board is ripping itself apart for a couple of reasons. I'm not going to go into detail about those, obviously, but I wish every one of my board members had at least a 1-hour session like this, because hopefully they will understand what some of the difficulties are, how we can't change the world overnight. Very proactive board. It's also a very large board, which is part of the problem. But we also have too many directors who are what I call 2 hour a month directors. They show up for the 2 hours a month of the board meetings, not having done any of the pre-reading. The biggest problem that exists in volunteer associations, every volunteer association I've ever served on, suffers when they deliver mission critical actions through volunteers. And that is the following basic concept. You can't fire a volunteer. You know, in fact, in another organization I'm on, I've got this, you know, there's this volunteer who keeps doing stuff in the name of the organization. And how do you get rid of them? I'm exploring right now with the president. Why don't we give them an award and get them out that way? You know, and there's a certain Machiavellian approach to that, I realize. But the important thing, to go back, Jim, to the heart of the question is, what are the qualifications to serve as a board member? Most of what I learned as a board member, I thought I learned by watching people 30 years ago when I first started on boards. But that's a mistake, because 30 years ago, we were far less sophisticated in corporate governance generally in the world than we are today. There are very significant governance findings that we now have reports, research, et cetera, on. One of the most significant report findings that keeps coming back, the more training that board members have on their job, the better they function as board members. Shouldn't be a surprise. I mean, you know, Jim, you know, if your career was spent in the military, my gosh, you guys spend 40% of your time training. You spend another 20% of your time simulating, and only 30–40% of the time is actually, you know, in theater or on deployments, you know, actually doing stuff. And that's why the military are really some of the most excellent people that we have in both Canada and the United States to deploy on emergencies, because they get training on resilience, things like that. Trouble is, we do no training about board members in the Rotary system. Yes, I would be very pleased to do something like this for clubs, for you know, districts. What are those little areas that we have in the district? I'd be happy to do that. The big problem is, are the directors going to show up? So Penny, where are we at with time? And are we getting close to having to go back to the main session? Or we're on break, and what, you have to unmute again. Yeah.
Yes, we've got, we're done with time. It's 10:13 and our break is till 10:25. The next session start at 10:25.
At 10:25. So I'm going to let you stretch your legs. I thank you very much for your attendance. You have up on the screen my direct contact information. If you didn't get and you wanted to get today's presentation, I'm just going to drag my heels for just a second while I put it back into your chat boxes. You have a link for the presentation that you should have received it again. You don't need to get it again if you don't want it, obviously. There's my email and telephone number if you'd like to contact me for your club. You know, whatever, I'm happy. In the case of Rotary, of course, I'd be happy to volunteer my time to, you know, do something within reason, of course. And thank you very much.
Yeah, thanks,
Thank you,
Marcel.
Marcel, for an excellent presentation. There are a lot of comments in the chat about how good it is, and we really appreciate you giving us your time today.
My pleasure. Bye, everybody.
Bye-bye. Is everybody set with their links for the next meeting? Okay.
Penny,
Yes.
I'm not seeing it in the chat, the Am I missing something here? How to
You
get?
are, look up under Marcel's name,
Oh.
1013. There it is. Click on it.
Okay.
Before I close this.
Sorry, Annette, what can I help you find? The link to
Oh,
the,
your presentation deck. I'm doing something wrong here. I'm not seeing the link in the chat.
sure.
It doesn't look like a link. It looks like a PDF.
Yeah, it looks like a PDF symbol probably, and then just
Yes.
click to open. Are you on a computer, or it's probably, you probably
I'm on
got
an
an Apple or
iPad.
something, an iPad. That's Annette, give me quickly your email address and I'll just pop it into an email to you if you would
Oh,
like.
thank you so much. And thank you for your time today. It's very informative. It's my name, Annette, AnnetteMarchionda. Very long name. Sorry about that.
Marchionda? Yeah, Annette Marchionda at.
Oh, yes. At gmail.com.
Okay, it's a way you should have it in a couple seconds in your email box, okay?
Thank you so much.
Bye,
Okay.
everyone.
Bye, Michel, c'est toujours là.
Thank you, Marcel. Bonjour.
Tu es
Great
toujours à
presentation.
l'outre-mer?
Oui, je suis en Côte d'Ivoire. Je vais rentrer à la fin du mois.
Okay. See, now
Right.
this is my president-elect, and Michelle is also right now in Ivory Coast. So you know, he's been joining us, of course, for the last couple of months. He's visiting his mother in Ivory Coast. So he is our international attendee here today.
Ah.
Okay, bye-bye, everybody.
Bye-bye.
Un plaisir, Michel. Bye-bye.